everybody. Welcome back to another delicious episode of Better Love and Sex. I am your host, Devi Ward, and I want to thank you for tuning in and joining us this evening for another conversation where we explore ways for you to awaken, heal, and transform your sexuality, my sexuality, all of our sexualities, so that we can have more love and better sex. I was thinking earlier today that love and sex are like the meat and potatoes of life, or the tofu burger and salad, or whatever it is that you eat, but it's like the sustenance from which we the source, the fuel for our lives. And so having that strengthened, having that enriched is just very, very core and fundamental for living a happy, healthy, and fully integrated human life. So this evening, the first question, and it's the only question I'm going to answer this evening so we can hear from our guest, is a woman shared with me that when she reaches pleasure that is just beginning to be really fun and deeper and more expansive than just in her genital region, it's trying, the pleasure, it sounds like it's expanding, and she says trying to move up her body, she often feels it turn to pain, stop dead, fade, and quite often it is only on the right side of her body that she feels any pleasure to begin with. So I want to address this. I have heard of similar experiences, and the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear this is that there's obviously some type of block. Now that block could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be spiritual, it could be purely energy. To give you a remedy, I would have to know more about, the cause, and more about the actual pain. Where are you feeling pain? Are you feeling pain in your clitoris? Are you feeling it in your vagina? Are you feeling it in your pelvis? Are you feeling it in your spine? Are you feeling it in your heart, in your belly? So where in your body are you feeling the actual painful sensation? And that will often help me determine, or Jacques determine what the actual block is. So it could be nerves, some sort of nerve issue, which would be a physiological or physical block. It could be emotions, an emotional block, which you're experiencing in your body, or it can be an energetic block, which again, you're experiencing as pain and numbness. So my first suggestion would be there is a specific breathing method that we teach called the ocean breath. And the ocean breath is specifically designed to help us heal and release any type of trauma or block from the physical body. That is what it was created for, and it is highly, highly effective. It is also the key to men and women expanding their full orgasmic potential, accessing their full orgasmic potential, because we often have a tendency to contract at peaks of pleasure as opposed to open and relax and expand. So the ocean breath is the key to not only healing trauma and freeing your body from these energetic blocks, but also accessing your full orgasmic potential. So I'm going to suggest that you look into the ocean breath. You can find it online at authentictantra.com. It's in our Tantra Essentials course. That's what I'm going to recommend for now, and you can share with me more information about what's going on for you, and maybe I can give you something more specific. So now, without further ado, we are going to turn to our wonderful guest this evening, Ashley Manta, and she is going to share with us some keys and also her story of surviving sexual assault. And this is a really profound. I mean, people often reflect to me, they're like, well, your show topics are they're not light and fluffy. And I think that's because there is so much pain and there is so much suffering. And I think it's important that we're speaking about these issues. It's important that our voices are heard, and it's important that other people who have had these experiences, because there's a hell of a lot of them. 1 in 4 women has experienced some sort of sexual assault or sexual violence. That's a lot, 1 in 4 women. So there's a lot of women walking around in pain, and they need to know that that there's hope and that there's support. So that's what Ashley is here to do. Ashley is here to share with us about her story of surviving sexual assault. Ashley is a sex-positive feminist sexuality educator. She works as a staff writer on topics of sexuality, relationships, and empowerment for the online magazines Evolved World and Kinkly. She's a regular contributor for the Herpes Opportunity, a website and forum that provides support for people living with herpes, and there's so many people living with that illness or sexual disease. I don't want to STI, but sexual issue. She currently sits on the board of directors for Voices Incorporated, a nonprofit designed to support survivors of sexual violence. She was also on the board of directors for the Women's Circle Project, a nonprofit geared towards empowering women to become tomorrow's leaders. So she's a very active woman. Her mission is to empower, honor, and educate the minds, bodies, and spirits of all people, regardless of the incidentals and essentials of our cultured existence, in order to foster relationship growth, personal transformation, and dialectic communication. Wow, that is amazing. Thank you, Ashley, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's an honor to have you. So you are a survivor of sexual assault. Would you be willing to share with us your story? What happened?
Yes, absolutely. What happened was when I was 13 years old, I was a virgin. I was in my spring semester of my 8th grade year, and I went over to a friend's house who I had known for a year or two, and he raped me. We were down in his basement, and he was smoking marijuana and blowing it in my face, and he forced himself on me. And I vividly remember thinking, I don't want to lose my virginity. And he sort of matter-of-factly told me that I had, in fact, lost my virginity, and that was just going to have to be the way it was. And I was really confused. I didn't have a lot of language to talk about what had happened. The extent of our sexual education in my middle school and high school was, talking about stranger danger and just say no, and red light people that might come up to you and harass you in some way. They really didn't talk about rape or especially acquaintance rape. That was something that was never really brought to the forefront or communicated about by anyone in authority until I was in college. And I was really confused. I didn't have words to describe it. I didn't want to tell my parents because I was somewhere that I wasn't supposed to be. And it really left me with a feeling that I was only worth something if a guy was interested in me sexually.
Yeah, wow, that's very common. I know for women who have been sexually abused as children, and myself, that was definitely my orientation to men for most of my life. As a result of that, was that I was only worthy if I was of use to man or receiving some sort of attention from a man. So it's psychologically, it just completely alters our relationship to life and to men.
It really does.
Yeah. So how did your friends and family react?
My friends and family didn't know for a long time. I didn't tell anyone what happened until I was about 16.
Wow. So 3 years.
3 years.
Wow.
I remember going into my gym class the next day in 8th grade and saying I had sex because I didn't have the words, I was raped. I didn't know what it was exactly. I just knew that it wasn't something that I wanted. So it wasn't until I was 16 that I actually came out and said I was raped. And I actually told my dad, and we've since discussed this, and he's realized where he erred when I originally told him. But his response to me was, well, I mean, at least he didn't have like a knife to your throat or anything. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of this, well, it could have been worse attitude. And he understands now that minimizing any victim's experience is really damaging. And we've gotten far past it, and he's incredibly supportive now. But at the time, I just, took that in, and this was the person that I looked to for protection and support. And he was kind of making it seem like it shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Right. So it just compounds the confusion for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how does it affect your approach to your experience of sex and your sexual identity as a woman to have your first sexual experience be rape?
It really shook me pretty deeply. It has evolved over the years, after getting therapy and really kind of reflecting on my experiences and talking about it with people. But at first I became hypersexual, which is a very common reaction for survivors of sexual violence. I became so open to sexuality, that anybody that had the slightest bit of sexual interest in me, I would sleep with them because it didn't seem like sex was valuable anymore.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's yep, exactly. Like you said, survivors of sexual violence, and also sexual abuse and sexual trauma. That's very common. The promiscuity, it's called, right?
Right, absolutely. And it tends to occur on a spectrum. Either it's someone becomes very sexual, or on the other side, they can also become very asexual, wearing baggy clothing, not socializing, having fear of touch. All of those things are also completely normal for survivors. It can occur really anywhere on the spectrum.
Do you find that maybe, like, even for one person that can go through different phases, like at some point they can be super ultra sexual and sexually expressive, and then they'll hit a point where they just completely withdraw from sexuality and do the baggy clothes and, don't want to be touched kind of thing? Can it fluctuate for people?
It can absolutely fluctuate. It changes daily. It can change based on situations. I mean, I know my sexuality has changed over the years. I went from very sexual to trying to kind of be more closed off, to really focusing on a partner and only, being sexual with that person, but still being very, very like hypersexual within the context of their relationship. So it's definitely changed over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems like it probably evolves and grows as you heal and kind of uncover layers of healing from that experience.
Absolutely. It changes based on, I've been in therapy since I was 16, and I think it's a really valuable tool to have a way to really go over the details of things that happen to you and have a non-biased third party to kind of bounce ideas off of and connect the dots in ways that you might not be able to, when you're just doing it on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. So how has this experience affected you personally and professionally? Like, it's interesting that it's affected you professionally.
It really has. My solution to this in college and graduate school was to approach rape and trauma from an academic perspective. I dove into research, training. I started working with survivors in every capacity I could. I worked as a rape crisis responder. I worked as a victim advocate in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. I ran a peer support group for survivors when I was in graduate school. I wrote academic papers. Like, I really just dove into how trauma affects people, how it affects women, what it can do sexually, how it can affect adolescents. And then also I wanted to learn more about healing from trauma, of course, because that was my goal. But I really looked at it from a very academic lens for a long time, and that was how I dealt with it at that point in my life.
So what kind of things did you find in regards to that in the academic lens?
One of the main things I found is that there's not a lot of research out there. I have my entire stack of research from years and years of looking is only about 3 inches thick. So there's not a ton of research out there. People are not really asking survivors, at different parts of their lives, how the experience has affected them. There's a lot of focus on stranger rape and not a ton of focus on acquaintance rape. That's only really become part of the scene in the last few years.
Which I think would be even more traumatizing, to be raped by someone that you trust or that because it's such a violation.
Exactly. And actually, it's funny that you say that, because I wrote an academic paper exactly to that effect. I said that acquaintance rape can actually in some ways be more damaging to survivors because it is a gross violation of trust. It's going to upset everything that the survivor knows or believes about themselves, society, justice, sexuality. It really can just upend your entire worldview.
Absolutely, yeah. It would be even more deeply psychologically traumatizing and emotionally traumatizing than stranger rape. At least I would imagine. Yeah, and I know, like, in cases of like sexual abuse within families, I mean, that's part of the thing. It's like be someone who's supposed to care for you being violated by somebody who's supposed to be supporting and caring for you. So it's deeply, deeply damaging.
It definitely can be. And I found that even more true because I've actually been sexually assaulted more than once. The second time was in graduate school when I was working on my master's degree in philosophy. There was another student that I went to graduate school with, and we were at a party at a mutual friend's house, and he was very close to me. And we were, I would almost say, best friends. And he got drunk, and I woke up, and he was on top of me.
Wow. 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 So is it common in your experience? Did you find that it's common for someone to be sexually assaulted more than once?
It is incredibly common, and not a lot of people know that, but I've seen statistics. I've seen as high as 2/3 of sexual assault survivors have been victimized more than once, and I've also seen 1/3. So between 1 and 2/3 of survivors have been victimized more than once. And there are a lot of reasons for that, physiologically, in terms of traumatic response. But suffice to say, it is incredibly common.
So what are the reasons? I'm really curious, like physiological reasons. Why?
So there are 3 standard responses to trauma that we as humans have. There's fight, and flight, which we're very familiar with. You know, they always talk about fight and flight, but there's also freeze, which is the dissociative reaction. And that is when your body is present, but your mind sort of takes a vacation. And that's a defense mechanism that your brain uses to help you detach from a scary situation. It's the deer in headlights look.
Yes.
And when people get into that mindset, they can't fight back, they can't yell, they can just kind of be there and kind of frozen. And when that's a common stress response, it becomes your body's go-to stress response.
So then would that cause someone, is it like just kind of like a magnet? Like why would that cause someone to be assaulted more than once?
Oftentimes, like especially for me, when I found myself being assaulted the second time, it brought back memories of the first time. So when it started to happen, I was completely paralyzed.
Okay.
My brain said, oh my God, this is happening again, and just took off. And all I could do was lay there.
Okay. All right. Okay. So you go into this freeze response, and then there's no fight. There's no fight, and there's no flight, and you're just there and just, I understand that. Given that, is there something that you wish your support network had known to do differently to help you overcome this and heal so that it didn't happen again?
I wish that my parents had known that the most important thing that you can do for a survivor is to believe them and to ask what they need. It's so important for a survivor to feel believed and to reclaim some of the power that was taken away from them in the course of the assault, because that's what rapists are after. They're after power and control. It has nothing to do with sex. So it doesn't matter if you were wearing a nightgown or a bra and panties or nothing at all. It has nothing to do with sex. I've seen victims that were as young as a few months old and as old as 90. You know, if it has nothing to do with that. And I wish that they had understood that and that they had asked me what I needed from them.
Yeah, because there's this cultural attitude, again, of blaming the victim, and, oh, was her skirt too short, and, oh, what did she do to deserve that, without the recognition that rape and sexual violence is about power, not about sexual attraction. Yeah. So given all of that, you have overcome a tremendous amount. So what does a good day for a survivor look like? It
really varies from person to person, but for me, a good day is when I'm feeling comfortable in my life and my relationship, and I'm feeling loved and supported. The best days for me are the ones where I get to interact with other people and talk about sexuality and healing and empowerment. Doing presentations for me for colleges and community groups feels amazing, because I get to connect with people and give a voice to something that's very silenced traditionally. So speaking out has been a huge, powerful thing for me. We were talking a little bit during the break about reasons why it's so important to speak out, and because survivors of sexual assault experience so much shame as a result of that. Are there other things that prevent survivors from speaking up and speaking out about it? We live in this culture where sexual assault is something that you're not supposed to talk about. And I say, not supposed to in quotation marks, because it's uncomfortable and because it sort of makes people feel bad. And when people feel bad, they want to not feel bad. So they want to change the subject. And it's also something that people joke about.
Yes.
You know, you see Tosh saying something during a comedy show to a woman in the audience saying, "I hope you get gang raped." And people laughed. And rape is something that people use. You know, I got raped by that test, or the IRS raped me this year in taxes. And people don't realize that survivors hear those things and they just can either get triggered by it and feel re-victimized, or they can feel like that's not anything like what rape is. And how could you say that? And it's kind of offensive. It's very offensive. So that kind of keeps survivors wanting to be like, you know what? I just want to keep this to myself and not make waves and not let myself become the butt of a joke or anything like that.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're probably like their need for validation and their need to be seen and, you know, and understood how painful that experience is. Like it's minimized in the way in our speech, in our cultural speech around rape.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what does a bad day for a survivor look like?
It can come in a lot of different forms. A bad day for me usually means that something or someone has triggered me. And when I say triggered, I mean that something has happened that either reminded me of the rape or the rapist, or made me really feel something in my body. Sometimes it's not even conscious. Sometimes, you know, you might smell someone's cologne, and that could be the cologne that the rapist was wearing. And it just brings you back to a really unpleasant place. So something might have triggered me, or maybe my body feels tired and sluggish, or sometimes it's a headache. It can be a lot of different things, but you just know that something's not quite right in your body.
I did some research on the symptoms of trauma, and it's really quite profound. So feeling things like you just described, like, you know, sluggish, feeling fatigued, feeling headaches, like there's all these kind of seemingly inconsequential symptoms that are indications of or actual like results of experiencing trauma in our lives. So it's really I don't know, I guess just something to really pay attention to when you have these symptoms. And do you personally, like, what do you do when these arise? Do you have methods that you use to kind of feel better, to feel more relaxed, to kind of like pass through the emotion?
I found mindfulness to be a really helpful technique, becoming aware of my body, taking deep breaths, kind of grounding myself, feeling my feet on the floor and my hands, you know, touching my leg or my hands touching each other, or taking a hot shower and getting in comfortable clothes and just calling someone that I'm close to that understands kind of what I need right then and is willing to either listen or just be on the phone silently. My boyfriend is wonderful about that. He will ask me what I need. And if I need a hug or snuggles, he'll do that. And if I'm like, honey, I just need to kind of be alone for a little while, he totally respects my space and just goes and does something else.
Mm-hmm. So how do your previous experiences of sexual assault play a role in your sex life today? I mean, that's like the big question for everyone, huh?
It has affected it in a couple of different ways. On the kind of negative side, I found that there are certain triggers that can really put me in a very negative headspace in the bedroom. If my partner pulls my hair, for instance, that's pretty much game over for the night, because it's really upsetting. And that's something that my rapist did the second time when I was 22. And it's really important for me during sex to have a lot of snuggling and eye gazing and attention, both before, during, and after sex, because it makes me feel safe.
Mm-hmm. So you need a lot of connection and a lot of like heart to heart connection, a lot of intimacy. And it sounds like feeling honored and respected and adored. Yes,
definitely. That is wonderful for me. And that can make sex really powerful and delightful, really can be pretty awesome. And it's also really important that I have learned how to express my needs more clearly to my partner. I can tell them that I need them to not pull my hair, or I really need them to touch me here or touch me like this, but not, you know, with an object, or I can kind of direct the experience the way that I need it to be, that's going to be safe for me. And I've learned how to do that. And that's been really important.
So then for women who have experienced sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, communicating, having the safety and the trust to be able to clearly communicate about where they're at emotionally during the sexual experience, what you're is saying that it's very, very important for them to have that.
It's incredibly important to have a sense of safety and trust with the partner. And not just in terms of physical safety. It could be using condoms. It could be, being aware of birth control. It could be emotional safety where, don't use certain words when we're having sex because they might upset me. It's really just creating a space where it's going to be comfortable for both people.
So what if a woman is really afraid of communicating during sex? I hear this a lot from women, is they're really afraid of just like even saying what they like. What would you recommend for a woman in that experience?
I would say that it takes practice and it takes time. It's a skill like anything else. When you first learn to ride a bike, you fall down the first several times and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, here I am riding down the block. So practicing when you're not having sex, talking to a partner in a non-sexual capacity when the clothes are still on and saying, hey, these are the things that I feel, kind of having an awareness of what they are first, maybe taking some time and making a personal inventory of these are the things I need to feel safe. And then communicating to the partner in a non-sexual context helps to kind of open the door and set the scene for when things are going forward sexually.
So this is a silly question, but I'm going to ask you. So in my experience, what I've seen is that women who have experienced any sort of sexual trauma, abuse, whatever, assault, it's going to pretty much definitely show up in your sex life later. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
And so being aware of that, I would imagine, is absolutely essential for women. So what advice do you have for women who have been sexually assaulted in order to help their partners kind of understand what's going on for them?
Well, the first thing that's incredibly helpful is to actually disclose the fact that they have a trauma history. It's something that I got into the habit of doing actually on the very first date. I don't necessarily recommend that to everyone, but for me, it was like, here's what you need to know about me. I've been raped. I have herpes. Oh, by the way, the rapist gave me herpes the second time. So that's something else I've been living with as a result of my rape.
Yeah. So full disclosure.
Yeah. Full disclosure. It was easier for me to get it out of the way right away. So that they kind of knew what they were getting into. Cause I can be a pretty awesome partner, but I also have my baggage that I bring with me. So it's important that my partner kind of has the whole picture so they can give informed consent to being with me. But having that conversation certainly before, someone gets sexual with their partner would be ideal. Now, if they're hearing this, a year or two into their relationship and they haven't told their partner yet, that's not too late, but it's definitely a good conversation to have as early as you can. And then, starting to really take a personal inventory of what you need to feel safe in your relationship, sexually and non-sexually, because there are things that can happen during an argument that can also be triggering that it's important for partners to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. So full disclosure, laying all the cards out on the table, like from day one, this is what's going on, so that, so that people know what's going on and that there's not a guessing game and misperceptions going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right on. So for you, what was one pivotal moment in your healing process?
The moment that I remember the most clearly was my first year of college. I attended a Take Back the Night rally at St. Joe's in Philadelphia, which is where I was going to school. It's a rally that's designed to raise awareness about sexual violence, and afterward, there's an open forum for survivors to tell their stories. I didn't intend to speak that night. I was just going to support my sorority sisters, but after a while, I found myself at the podium sharing my story, and it was the first time I ever told my story in public, and I told it to a chapel full of people.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds like it was probably cathartic for you.
It was incredibly cathartic. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and empowering all at the same time.
Wow. And so then what did you experience after that? Like after you shared your story with this huge group of people, did you open up? Did you feel your life blossom? Were you able to let go more deeply?
It happened kind of in waves. I realized that telling my story was an incredibly powerful tool for healing for me. And so I knew that I wanted to do that more often. And I also realized that there were going to be days that were really lousy. Because healing for anyone from anything, but especially for survivors, is not a linear process. It's not this day is better than the last day, that's better than the last day, that's better than the last day. You're going to have twists and turns and bends and loops and kind of understanding that and recognizing that you're not going to have a better day every day. Some days are going to be kind of lousy was helpful for me because then I didn't expect too much of myself in my healing journey.
Mm-hmm. So you were able to just relax and give yourself some space.
Exactly.
Yeah, right on. We live in a culture that condones and supports to a large degree sexual violence towards women. I was looking at some statistics earlier today, and 500 women a day are raped or sexually assaulted in the United States alone. So that's just in the United States. That's not worldwide. So there seems to be this prevalence of assaulting, sexual assault towards women. And then also, most recently, I'm sure everyone's aware of the Steubenville rape case, where at a party, a girl passed out and was basically publicly raped, and it was filmed. And this is just kind of the attitude is, well, boys will be boys. Like, this is a natural, normal part of existence as women, and an attitude that men have that it's okay, that it's acceptable, that this is just, part of being, sowing your wild oats, so to speak. So this is a cultural attitude. And so, Ashley, do you have some suggestions or some things that we can look at, that we can examine, that may help us begin to change our psychology and our approach and the way we think about rape as a culture?
Absolutely. For a long time, the focus in the field was on risk reduction. It was focusing on don't let your drink alone, use the buddy system, don't let anyone that you don't know into your apartment. So there was this real focus on women or people don't get raped. And now we've finally started to shift toward a prevention point of view that focuses on don't rape people, which is a really important distinction. Because ultimately the responsibility is on the rapist. It is not about the victim at all. It's not about what they were wearing, what they were doing, what kind of substances they had imbibed. It doesn't matter, any of that. The only thing that matters is the rapist and what they're doing. It's their responsibility. So for the Steubenville case especially, while it is the rapist's responsibility to not rape people, it's also everyone else's responsibility if they see something happening to step in and say, hey, that's not okay.
Yes.
If one person at that party had said, what you guys are doing is wrong, let's call this girl's parents, let's call somebody and get her out of here because this is not a good place for her to be, it wouldn't have happened.
Right, absolutely. So the community taking a stand and saying, hell no, this is not acceptable behavior.
Absolutely. So it's people stepping in and saying that this behavior is not acceptable and saying we're going to do something and not just stand by and let it happen. So we call that, bystander intervention, getting involved and standing up. And the other piece of it that's incredibly important is consent, obtaining consent. Because so many times when I would teach classes, especially at high schools, the kids would say things like, well, how do you know if a person really wants to have sex? Like, how can you tell? What are the signs? And I was like, well, if you ask them if they want to have sex and they say yes, that's a pretty good sign. Mm-hmm. But so often we don't ask. We're afraid to ask.
Well, and I think also there's this, part of our conditioning as women is that we're not supposed to ask for sex. Good girls
Right.
don't like sex, so
Right.
we just kind of are like, oh, well, we're just gonna submissive, right? As opposed
Yeah.
to, like you shared, an enthusiastic yes, like, fuck yeah, let's have sex. It's not okay for women to be horny.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the sex negative culture that we live in.
Exactly. That sexual pleasure and sexual enjoyment and sexual enthusiasm is not okay, especially for women. And if you are a sexually enthusiastic woman, then you are a slut.
Right. And
Yeah.
slut shaming is so prevalent in this culture. Oh, she's wearing a short skirt, or even women that are successful. She must have slept her way to the top. There's this just perception that the only thing that women are good for is their sexual cachet, and they're reviled for it. And there's this, Madonna whore complex where a woman is either good and chaste and wonderful and pure, or she's a whore.
Yeah, so there's this dichotomy, or this sexual dichotomy, and we're confused as women. We're like,
Yeah.
what the heck, I want to get married and be the Madonna, but I also would like some great sex.
Absolutely. And you can have both.
Yes, integrating the two. So how do you support survivors of sexual trauma? What are some ways in which, if a woman's been sexually assaulted, what are some outreaches, and what are some ways in which she can get support in her healing so that she can overcome this?
Well, I think the most important thing for any survivor is to feel believed and to have choice in what their healing path looks like. Therapy was great for me, but talk therapy doesn't work for everyone. Some people need art therapy or music therapy, or they need to run a marathon, or, paint a mural, whatever it might be that's going to be right for them in terms of defining their own healing journey is really clutch. And also being aware that there are a lot of really great resources out there. The Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, RAINN.org, has online support that you can do it via chat. They have phone support. There are rape crisis centers all over the country that offer free counseling to rape survivors, which can be really helpful to have someone who is trauma informed, understands how rape can affect people, and is able to talk with a survivor about their experiences.
Mm-hmm. And do you personally work with women? Do you work with many men who have been sexually assaulted? Because I know, when we think of rape, we usually think man on woman. But have you encountered many men who have been sexually assaulted in your work?
I have encountered people of all gender identities that have been sexually assaulted. Men, women, trans people. There's no boundaries. There's no racial boundary. There's no socioeconomic boundary. There's no gender identity boundary. Everyone could be the victim of sexual violence. And I've found a lot of people in groups that are traditionally not looked at, men, trans people, that have been victimized and feel like they don't have a whole lot of help and resources, because so often we talk about women being raped by men. So it's so important to, reach out also to those who are in non-traditional orientations, that are men, that are in different sexual orientations, to know that there are resources out there for them as well.
Yeah. So in your work that you do you personally work with people to help them heal that trauma?
I am not a licensed therapist, but I do sexual empowerment coaching online. And if someone is having things that they want to talk about, I kind of go at it from my philosophical background, from being, sex positive and being a sexuality educator. And then also I'm a hypnotist. So I look at it some neurolinguistic programming techniques that I use that kind of encompass this empowerment coaching that I do.
Awesome. So we are getting close to the end of the show. And so I just want to give you a chance. Is there anything, what would you like to share with everybody to transform this attitude of acceptance for sexual violence towards women?
I think if there's one thing that you can take away from this, it is that it can happen to anyone. And so it's incredibly important to be aware of words and gestures, and asking for consent is so key. You know, if everyone asked for consent, short of the people that are really sociopathic and want to hurt people, rape rates would decline drastically if people would just ask for consent and gain consent without pressuring.
Do you know of any programs that, because there's a lot of programs, it sounds like, to supporting survivors of sexual trauma, sexual assault. What about the perpetrators? Are there any programs that actually help them like heal this thing that causes them to feel like this is okay behavior?
There are definitely treatments available for sex offenders. Typically they're for convicted sex offenders, but there are also therapists and groups out there for people that, you know, notice that they have a sexual compulsion toward sexual violence. Because so many times people that are violating other people have been violated themselves.
Right.
So many rapists have been sexually violated at some point in their lives. So a lot of times you can trace that back, and they need therapy, they need help. And that doesn't excuse what they're doing by any means, but it's really important that we kind of address this as a holistic problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding the cause, the trigger for that to occur. And then it sounds like also like educating. So for those men that, you know, like football players, that they just accept that that's like part of being a guy sowing his wild oats. It sounds like changing the cultural attitude around sex and women, and allowing, like you shared, that enthusiastic consent response for women to be able to give that and not be slut shamed for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if someone wants to work with you, because you're wonderful and fabulous and so knowledgeable, how would they go about doing that?
You can reach me in a couple of different ways. You can find me on my website, which is www.ashleymanta.com. You can email me at ashley.manta@gmail.com, or you can call my cell phone at 484-947-6153. Those are the best ways to get a hold of me. I'm actually on the road for the next week and a half. I'm traveling cross country. My boyfriend and I are relocating to Los Angeles, which is so exciting. But I will still be available on the road. So reach out, and I would love to talk with anyone and work with anyone. It would really be a pleasure.
Awesome. And you also present, you do speaking engagements. Do you do speaking engagements for like schools and colleges and that sort of thing?
I do schools, colleges, community groups. I have also worked with businesses and healthcare providers to talk about trauma-informed care. So I'm absolutely available for that. I can travel anywhere. And I love to do speaking engagements. I love working with groups of people. It really just energizes me in a huge way.
Turns you on.
It does.
Absolutely. Totally get it. I love working with large groups too. Right on. So I want to thank you so much, Ashley. It has been wonderful. It has been enlightening, and it has been powerful and profound to hear you share your experience and your story and offer the support that you have to our audience and to all survivors of sexual trauma, sexual assault. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Well, we'll love to have you back another time, because you have such a wide breadth of knowledge to share with people. And again, if you want to get a hold of Ashley to work with her, you can find her at, give your website address again, please.
www.ashleymanta.com. That's MANTA, like manta ray.
Wonderful. So I want to thank you, everyone out there, for tuning in and joining us this evening for another edition of Better Love and Sex. And so thank you all. Look forward to having you here with me next week.